I just think and usually I'm not the one to really suggest retirement for players, but I just don't know what LeBron is doing. I don't understand why he's in the league. What's going on here? Because I just don't think. I think if LeBron was giving a clear effort, and I think what we saw that in the Olympics, he was awesome at the Olympics. You saw it; he was trying there. Like you saw a different LeBron, and I just think we don't see that in the NBA at all, regular season, let alone in the playoffs. And I mean that's unfortunate. I think the fans are picking up on it
in America, and that's right when you see the shift to the Major League Baseball being basically leapfrogged by both the NFL and the NBA once that happened. Now, I think it's a little simplistic, probably was going to happen sooner or later just with how good of a television product the NFL is. But my point in bringing this up is, do you get the sense that there's danger for like a point of no return with the WNBA? I mean, could this be the end of the league entirely, or some sort of like doomsday scenario?
Hi everyone, Tim Kitzer with you, the voice of NBA Jam. From top journalists and authors to rising influencers and insiders, Hoopsology brings you the voices driving basketball forward. With elite guests and sharp analysis, Matt, Justin, and Alan keep you plugged into everything hoops. From downtown, boom shakalaka.
Well, before we get into our topics for today, which there are some massive ones here that we will cover. Matter of fact, we don't have a ton of topics because the topics that we're covering are so big. So I think you'll get a nice big juicy steak of a show today, or mushroom steak depending on your preference there. But before we get into that, just want to give a shout out to listeners and viewers who have been supporting the show for a long time now, several years, as well as our new subscribers that have come on board. Thank you as always for supporting the show. You can watch our episodes and interviews drop in every single week, usually multiple per week on our channels and podcast feeds. We had a great one talking about kind of sports psychology that recently dropped. Was one of my favorite interviews that we did in 2025 that just dropped recently, like last week. So definitely check those out. And we always appreciate your referrals and recommendations to your friends, family, loved ones. If you have anyone in your life who likes these deeper sports conversations, talking about not only what happens on the court, but what happens off the court and the big cultural and societal impacts that the game of basketball specifically has. But sometimes we even, dip our toes outside of the realm of basketball on here, always trying to mix it up. So long story short, thank you so much for your continued support. And without further ado, Justin, let's get into these big topics here today. And we have this looming deadline for the WNBA that I want to lead off with because there are some huge ramifications here potentially. So this has been a can that has been kicked down the road a few times in terms of extending the deadline for this negotiation. It seems like we're kind of at a hard line here coming up January 9th and a few days away from the recording day of this podcast. So Justin, if you would, I know you took thorough notes here. If you could kind of update us on the situation, and then we'll get into some perspective and maybe bigger picture items on this lockout.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize for me doing a lot of reading, but I think it's important kind of to set the table and lay out some context to what we're discussing here. So ESPN, I think, did a great job of explaining this. So I'll read their report. Check out their reporting on their site. Now, I make sure to include the link in the description too, so you can check it out fully. But it basically says the collective bargaining agreement between the WNBA and the Women's National Basketball Players Association will expire in 1 week. Even if January 9th comes and goes without a new agreement, as of now, all signs point to that scenario. It doesn't automatically mean a work stoppage would occur. Instead, a period of status quo would follow in which the current CBA would be maintained, and even without a new deal in place, the league and union could continue negotiating, which I could honestly see happening. But if there's not an extension, it could open the door for a potential work stoppage, either a strike initiated by the players or a lockout initiated by the owners. Last month, the players voted to authorize a WNBA PA executive committee to strike when necessary, a move when the union called an unavoidable response to the state of negotiation with the WNBA and its teams. So another deadline, which I'm not aware of, is also the expansion draft. That's not taken place yet. And then we have the WNBA lottery. I think that's already gone down, but also the WNBA draft as well. So there's a lot of key dates that need to happen because we have some new expansion teams as well. It goes on in the ESPN report that says, the sides remain far apart on key several issues, including what a revenue sharing system should look like, what should be considered revenue, and how to account for expenses. Multiple sources familiar with the negotiations told ESPN this week that the WNBA is projecting a recent proposal from the WNBA PA was to give players about 30% of gross revenue, and is believed to feature approximately $10.5 million of a salary cap that will result in a $700 million in losses over the course of the agreement. Such losses would jeopardize the league's health, the sources said, and they would be more than the combined losses of the league and its teams during the 29-year history of the existence of the league. But the union disagrees. They believe the revenue sharing model still puts the league in a profitable position, a separate source close to negotiations said, and calls for the league's projected loss figure to be absolutely false, citing a discrepancy in whether expansion fees are factored in. The union's proposal accounts for expansion fees in its projections, seeing them as real money that still contributes to the owner's bottom line. The league considers them transactions that generate zero net revenue. New teams are out of the expansion fee but will earn a fractional share of the future league revenue, while pre-existing teams get a portion of the fee but lose a fractional share of future league revenue. Either way, the two sides remain divided on the nature of the next deal revenue sharing model. And then it goes on to say the league has proposed a system in which the players would receive in excess of 50% of net revenue, a source told ESPN, while the union is proposing a system in which the players will receive about 30% of gross revenue. And then we'll get into more of the alternatives and the comments from Caitlin Clark. But kind of your reaction to this, Matt, in terms of what you're hearing and what your feelings are overall.
Yeah, well, for some context to one of the items that you mentioned there, when they voted to give the Players Association representatives permission to strike, it was, I believe, 93% of eligible players that voted on that. And of the players that voted, 98% of them voted in favor of giving them permission to strike. So the players, as they appeared in the All-Star game, when they all wore the shirts that they wore, basically saying, pay us what we're worth. And the players seem pretty united on this. When Nafisa Collier made her statements about the commissioner a few months ago that we covered on this show, she received a ton of support from the players as well in those striking remarks against the WNBA commissioner, Kathy Engelbert. So I think you see still, and of course I want to throw back to your thoughts on this too, Justin, and get your reaction, but I think you still see two sides that are very far apart, and it's hard to imagine a compromise. I think the big thing right now in breaking this down is not even the salaries, which are increasing significantly, by what is currently proposed by ownership, but I think it's really the revenue sharing that's the big deal. And you see a rift there. You see ownership that wants to offer 15%, which and along with, there's other ideas that you mentioned there too, and then the Players Association demanding 30%. And that's where I don't know that they're going to come together with a number that they can shake hands on. It feels to me like the players are kind of locked in with 30% or we strike, whereas the ownership, I'm not sure how much more they're willing to go up. higher than the 15% that's on the table there. I do think to make a deal happen, they certainly will need to take that number up to give the players, that feeling of getting a win. I just don't know that ownership is going to be willing to give that 30%. I think they do look at it as incurring losses in the short term, while they've also incurred losses in the past to keep the league afloat. And I know players and certainly many in media feel very differently, but what I'm saying is I think that's ownership's perspective on that. And they could also be, as both sides do in a negotiation, they're keeping their cards, very close to their chest to not reveal everything. So in the battle of public perception, it seems like the players certainly have a ton of public support. But I do think that there is a real significant chance that we are going to see a strike here because of what I mentioned initially, that distance between both sides and getting to a compromise seems almost insurmountable from everything that I've been seeing and reading and watching over the past few days as this deadline approaches. But Justin, before I ramble on anymore, I mean, what is your perception with where things are right now, and how hopeful are you that, a deal may be struck? You've certainly been a lot closer with the WNBA stuff than I have even. So
Yeah, not hopeful at all in terms of the experts we've talked to. There's been some that have been hopeful that an agreement would be reached, but most have been very pessimistic. And I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, star power. I mean, we can rifle off all the names of the players in this league that have really caught fire in terms of a casual sports audience. And other than I think of the creation of the WNBA, I believe the league's never been hotter in terms of players and their popularity. So I think that's one factor in terms of player leverage. And I think, too, is alternatives. I mean, we have never seen really, I'm trying to think of other sports. The NFL doesn't have alternative leagues. The NBA, a lot of the alternative leagues are overseas, and there's the big three. But in terms of main stars playing, in other leagues, the WNBA, that is a fact of life. And it's increased with leagues inside North America, with Unrivaled, which their season just kicked off recently, and with this Project B that has rumored money funded by Saudi Arabia. And we've seen multiple players linked to this league. And will this league happen? I have no idea. It's projected to be kicking off later this year. But that is a lot of momentum. A lot of players are starting to bounce to this league. I think it was even Sophie Cunningham, I believe. She was talking about how she was trying to convince Caitlin Clark about trying to get into this league. So we're seeing players basically exercising their leverage and, saying, hey, look, we're not being paid. We're the best in the world. We're going to play elsewhere. And so I think with the WNBA, this is a massive concern. And I want to read a comment by Caitlin Clark. This was at the USA basketball training camp in December. I think this is from her. I think the most important thing for myself in thinking about these CBA negotiations is this is the biggest moment the WNBA has ever seen. And it's not something that can be messed up. And, we're going to fight for everything we deserve. But at the same time, we need to play basketball. That's what our fans crave. That's what all of you crave as well. You want to put the product on the floor. But there could be a product, but not in the WNBA. So, and that's what I am wondering with these players is I think the owners would probably have maximum leverage if this was going down 5 years ago or earlier, just because the league's popularity wasn't at the level as it is now. So to me, I think we are headed towards a lockout or strike, really unresolved in terms of getting a deal done. And I just don't know. I honestly, I can't get a feeling on it. I'm hoping we can just talk with an insider, one of our past guests, and see if we can get more of a vibe on this. I'm not very optimistic about them reaching a deal anytime soon.
Let me follow up with this then, because this is something that I find really interesting. I personally am not sold on an alternative league, having the name brand recognition and the draw that the WNBA has, like purely because people are so familiar with NBA, and now the WNBA has been an institution for nearly 30 years. So I am skeptical. I know that there are options, and yes, players, at least in the short term, would get paid in these options. But what do you think the staying power is of like Unrivaled or this Project B? I mean, there could be backlash from the casual sports fan in that, obviously you think of like the live golf situation. You think of when you're dealing with like people used to like a national basketball association and, the Women's National Basketball Association. People are going to have feelings about, I don't know if I want to invest my time and money into a Saudi Arabia owned league. And also when our tip-off time is going to be, we've talked on this show about how inaccessible the WNBA has been in years past in terms of finding those tip-off times and where to watch games. This seems to throw a wrench into all the progress that you've made towards making the product accessible. I'm just curious what your thought is, Justin, because again, you have more insight than I do in terms of these alternative leagues. Do you think, we know Angel Reese is a star that gets clicks and attention. We know that Caitlin Clark, biggest star we've ever seen, I would say, in the WNBA in terms of what she has pulled in only 2 years in the league so far. There will be eyeballs on them if they make a jump over there. But do you think the casual sports fan that maybe has started tuning into WNBA will be interested if we go into lockout and they have to get used to another league?
Yeah, it's so hard. Before I answer your question, I want to provide some clarification. And still unclear regarding the Saudi Arabia ties. Front Office Sports reported last February, it was based on a Financial Times report, that Project B was backed in part by Saudi Arabia's Sovereign Wealth Fund. But then it came out by Project B's co-founder, Grady Burnett, that he said that doesn't include any dollars from Saudi Arabia. So take that for what you will. As I heard conflict in terms of what's going on here. It says Front Office Sports says that while Burnett denies Project B is funded anyway by Saudi Arabia, including in the form of promised money if the league hits certain investment thresholds, there is a connection. Sella, a subsidiary of the Saudi Public Investment Fund, is an event partner of the league. So we will see what happens. And I think we've seen it with many entities within the United States. I am very privy to this within combat sports with Riyadh season. So it just depends on what's going to happen here. So I don't really buy that they're completely divorced from Saudi Arabia. To answer your question, creating a sports league is extremely difficult. It is one of the hardest business ventures you can possibly do for a lot of reasons. One, you need a lot of money. Two, you need to be down with losing a lot of money. You need a lot of money. And I think, going to a couple of cases within the combat sports realm, and Matt, you watched MMA. I think you remember Affliction. You remember those ugly T-shirts? I bought an Affliction T-shirt. I bought a couple of Affliction T-shirts. And you remember
everyone had an Affliction T-shirt, back in that decade.
Yeah, absolutely. So you remember Affliction held some pay-per-views. They had a stacked lineup. They had a lot of great fighters. Went out of business. They paid them a huge amount of money. They couldn't sustain it. Meanwhile, UFC kept trucking along, and they are what they are now. And so I think my question for both these leagues, I think Unrivaled seems to be more of a more promising league, just because it's different than the WNBA. It's into winter compared to just competing with it. Also, I like kind of the different concepts that they're going about it. And also it's owned by like the players with Evisa Collier and Brianna Stewart. They have been hands-on and really creating this league and taking feedback from other players around the basketball world. Project B, I think I have a lot of questions. In this day and age, to really play ball and to be a player, you need a TV deal. You haven't heard of a TV deal? Haven't heard, where this is going to take place. Unrivaled, we got subtle announcements of when this league is going to be created. We got Brianna Stewart and Visa Collier in Good Morning America. The social media campaign was great. We got the announcement of teams, coaches, players, into the beginning of the first season. So with Project B, I mean, that's not the name of the league. I mean, that's just, a what is it called? A beta name for what it could be. So I think with the players, they are taking a chance with this Project B, sight unseen. And if I were them, I'd be extremely nervous signing this contract, and they have not gotten a TV deal, and we don't even have the name of the league, the true name of the league yet. So that's where the concern goes. I think to answer your other question in terms of will fans follow it, I think that's an interesting question. I think because the last 5 years, they've had an influx of a lot of new fans within the W. I think I agree with you, Matt. There's going to be a lot of problems transferring those fans into new teams, new rules, new times in terms of when these games air. People they're creatures of habit, and they want things to be easy. We'll get to it later in terms of the whole all-star format debacle in the NBA. But typically, the simplest you make things, it's easier for your consumer to understand. And I think, having a lot of your WNBA players be sprinkled out to these other leagues, it's going to really complicate the market. And I think the only person that has the star power to really carry people over is a Caitlin Clark, I think, just because of her popularity. So if the WNBA really has trouble in starting up their season, if one of these leagues can get their hands on a Caitlin Clark contract, I think that can maybe persuade a lot of fans to give one of these other startup leagues a chance. Otherwise, I think I agree with you. I think it's going to be very difficult for these new leagues to gain any traction.
Yeah. A lot of good points that you bring up there. You mentioned the difficulty in starting a sports league. I 100% agree with that. I think I would venture to guess, a league that looks very similar in format is going to do the best. Like what you said, something that looks similar to what people are used to seeing. That's where my question with Unrivaled and being sort of a different format, I wonder if that's going to catch on as much, despite the familiar names of players that are backing it and have an active role in its leadership. I'm really curious with the WNBA, if let's say they lose a full season and they lock out, you hear the comparisons to MLB in '94. MLB was the top sport in America, and that's right when you see the shift to the Major League Baseball being basically leapfrogged by both the NFL and the NBA once that happened. Now, I think it's a little simplistic. There probably was going to happen sooner or later, just with how good of a television product the NFL is. But my point in bringing this up is, do you get the sense that there's danger for like a point of no return with the WNBA? I mean, could this be the end of the league entirely, or some sort of like doomsday scenario like that?
David Sampson, he owns the former owner of the Marlins. He's on with Pablo Torre, brought this up. I don't see that happening. I just see just two sides coming to a resolution. I think with Project B, that's an unknown. Even if Athletes Unlimited and with Unrivaled, that's a limited amount of spots. You can't have the entire WNBA play in both those leagues. So those are extremely limited. And I think what happened overseas, where there's a lot of just WNBA players wanting to play in America, I think there's going to be a push to have the season resume. So at a doomsday scenario, I just don't see it. I just think there's so much money and so much more momentum within the league. I'm just curious, and again, I'm not an expert, and this is something I would like to ask some of our other journalists that know a hell of a lot more than I do. How much is the NBA going to invest in this, right? Like, they want to invest in these international leagues. I think Front Office Sports even predicted that the league will expand to 32 teams this year. Adam Silver has denied it. So I'm just wondering, you have this other entity that has rising stars. I'm just wondering, why not put more money into this already, growing entity? I know we have the owners and everything, but I'm just wondering from an investment point of view, like, I'm very curious why we haven't seen the NBA, be more proactive, and especially with Adam Silver, because his comments have been, hey, I'm going to let them negotiate. I'm going to stay out of it. But it's getting pretty contentious. I mean, like you said earlier, you had one of the biggest stars and, best players in the league publicly call out the commissioner. I mean, I don't remember that ever happening in sports. I mean, like that ever. So I'm just wondering from an NBA standpoint, from their perspective, when is enough for them in terms of them actually, making sure that a intellectual property of theirs doesn't, go under. That's what I'm kind of wondering, because there's a lot of momentum. I mean, you have Golden State, successful. Portland, they've had great season ticket deposits. We've seen great interest all over the country for WNBA franchises. It's hard for me just to see Adam Silver in the NBA just let this just fall apart.
Yeah, and I think, this is where you might caution the players in their negotiations, because if let's just accept, blind face, let's assume it's true that let's say the WNBA is having losses. Let's say, reports that they lost even more this last season from the extra marketing and from flying private instead of commercial. Let's assume, that losses were extreme. We've talked on this show about investing in the future, and that with valuations of the teams like the Valkyries, like you mentioned, already getting high team valuations. However, the sort of trump card I'm wondering about in this deal is if Adam Silver is sitting there and saying, like, okay, we've been supporting this league the whole time I've been commissioner, and before I was commissioner, we've been, subsidizing this league. If we go for this season, if we don't do a deal and lock out for a season, then I'm actually not losing as much money by not operating for a season. That, I think, would be a harmful scenario for both sides. I think you're stunning the growth of the league there, especially when you're just about to have these expansion teams launch. Like you mentioned, Justin, I think in particular, this timing with just getting the television deal, with the momentum you're building from the last two seasons, I do see it as a really destructive time to lock out. I would agree with what you said earlier. I don't think it spells the very end for the WNBA if they lock out, but I do think you're taking several steps backward if you wait until 2027 to play basketball again.
That's where I don't know. I think, how do I put this? If the league didn't have the stars as it has now, I'd be a lot more concerned. But if we don't see Caitlin Clark for a year, if you don't see Asia Wilson, Paige, you don't see Cameron Brink, if you don't see, all these, stars that have really carried the league over the past few years, I think there's going to be a point where fans want it back. And I think once it comes back, I can't foresee just fans just being like, well, the WNBA locked out for a year, I'm not watching Caitlin Clark. I just don't see that. I just think the media really love Caitlin Clark, and it's a great media story. So I just can't foresee just fans or just the media just ignoring her return to the WNBA returning after a year of a lockout. I just don't see that happening, in my opinion. Now, in terms of like the financial damage and like the intricacies of kind of building the league, I have no idea. But I think from a public perception standpoint, I don't think it's going to really affect it. I think it might even give the league a boost. I'm not saying for them to lock out. I just think kind of a consequence of a lockout would be a short-term boost in fan interest, just because the league's been gone for, if there was a shortened season or there's a cancel season. I don't see the fans just leaving the WNBA over a lockout.
Interesting. Yeah, because I wonder about that, and I'll be curious to see, of course, and we'll cover it on this show. And I know we have other topics we want to get to too, but this deadline looms. I will say throughout this process, and if and when a strike occurs and a lockout occurs, there's been a lot of emotions tied into it too, and that's why I wonder about people returning to watch it or not. And you're kind of rolling the dice in a way. I mean, MLB thought that they would stay on top despite a lockout in the 90s. Now that's different scenario, of course, and the MLB retained its relevance, certainly, just lost a bit of positioning there. I'm curious to see, if there will be a perception from fans that our players are mistreated. I don't want to support a league that mistreats players, if they don't get what they're asking for. I don't know how that may go one way or the other.
I think it gives fans too much credit. I didn't want entertainment. They want, the thing that was missing to them. In my opinion, I think they just want, the stuff that was missing. And I think this was prior years, what is really missing, right? The league was not promoted correctly. So they're not promoting all these great players that should be getting the credit because the television partners in the league was not marketed properly. Since COVID, we've seen a massive change, and that's led to, and if we get generational talents in a lot of ways led by, Asia Wilson, that's probably going to go down as, one of the greatest players ever. So, this past, 5 years, it's been really fruitful, and not only talent, but also the league marketing themselves properly. And I think that helps in terms of fans getting back into it. Whereas I think if the league wasn't marketed properly, a lack of star power, a transition in the league where you're having an influx of newer talent trying to find themselves, but no one's really clicking, I think you'd probably be right. I think the league, it's a cold league and you go into a lockout. Instead, you have a really a league that's on fire in terms of popularity, expansion, interest, and you have all these other sub-leagues. I think it should withstand a lockout. Now, from a public perception standpoint.
Yeah, we'll be curious to see.
Yeah, we'll see
what happens. Any closing thoughts on this, our main topic for this show today, before we move forward, Justin?
I would just say, in terms of even, I would encourage our fan base to follow WNBA journalists on social media that are following the story relatively closely. So not relying on just your first take or what you might hear in a 30-second soundbite on the national news. If you really want to know more, just try to look for some great reporters doing the work and have different perspective. Howard McDowell's more in favor of the league, and he's been a veteran reporter. He had him on the show. We have other reporters, Jordan Robinson, Quita Loves Sports. They're more from the perspective of the players.
Robin Runberg.
Yes.
I've seen he's been covering that pretty closely.
Yeah, totally. So I would just recommend, I know with social media, it could be a cesspool if you don't want to go on, or at least just, surf the web and just search on Google. Just follow journalists that are following these stories closely to get the information and not rely on a Stephen A. Smith narrative. That's going to lead to a lot of misinformation out there.
So I think it sounds like we're both predicting, probably prepare yourself for a lockout.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens. We might be talking about this again next week, Justin, depending on what goes down or doesn't go down this Friday. So we'll keep our fingers on the pulse on that. And for those of you watching or listening, we'd love your comments and thoughts on the WNBA. What do you think will happen? What do you think should happen? What is maybe a compromise that both sides could reach that would serve everyone well? Would love to know your thoughts on that. But Justin, let's go ahead and move into our next topic, which is looking at the Western Conference of the NBA, the mythical undisputed greatest conference in National Basketball Association, at least through the 2000s. I looked up, and I believe 20 of the 24 seasons since the year 2000, the Western Conference has won the West versus East head-to-head battle each season. So there has been dominance there. You think of like some of the great dynasties like the Lakers and Spurs coming from there in the 2000s. And then, of course, that great Warriors dynasty, or at least mini dynasty. There's been a lot of good teams out West. This season, I looked it up, and at least this morning before recording, the West is outpacing the Eastern Conference head-to-head. I believe it was like 53 games to 48 on the East. But, you know, it's interesting. The West has been wavering a little bit, and we have a couple factors that came into play this week. Justin, I know you have information on Jokic's injury. That's certainly one thing that is maybe shaking the faith a little bit in Denver. We've also, just this morning, I saw that Şengün is out for, I believe, at least 2 weeks for the Rockets. So that another top-tier team in the West. And then the third top-tier team in the West, at least from our early season predictions, the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're healthy, thankfully, but they've gone 6-6 in their last 12 games, most recently being blown out by the Charlotte Hornets. And that was even with a fully healthy and participatory OKC roster. So pretty unthinkable there. So Justin, if you could update us on Jokic's injury, and then I'd love to know your thoughts, just if your thoughts have changed on the Western Conference.
Yeah, not a super big update on Jokic. He had a scary knee injury against the Miami Heat. Very frightening, just a freak accident. Everybody, oh man, you should have seen NBA Twitter on that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of prayer circles, a lot of candles, like any kind of incense, whatever religion that you choose to practice. People were certainly engaged in trying to give Jokic the best well wishes possible. He's still within the 4-week evaluation window. I even heard some rumors that he could have returned some most recent games, so that's good to hear. And I've seen that he's recovering pretty quickly. And to my knowledge, I don't think he's ever suffered a really massive injury through his entire career, which is pretty incredible. I mean, it tells you in this age of athletes with ACLs, Achilles tears, calf strains, that this guy has never had a massive major injury. So
I think his last big injury was a shoulder injury, if I'm not mistaken.
Gotcha.
But I don't think he was out for longer than a month.
Gotcha. I guess out for a season. I don't know. You and Alan may correct me on that. But I think the Nuggets have done relatively well. I mean, they've been missing Aaron Gordon. I mean, that's been an anchor through their entire season. He's been hurt for a lot of games. So
Christian Brown too.
Yeah, exactly. And really the player that's been rising, he's been taking a lot of crap over the years, and he has never made an all-star team, but the odds are in it. This is a weird year, so who knows what's going to happen. Jamal Murray, he's had a fantastic year. Now, who knows how's that's going to happen with the all-star team, because the format, but he's been awesome.
Being so deep,
the West
too.
Stacked, too. Correct. And along with that, Bruce Brown coming back, the addition of Tim Hardaway Jr. This team is still, I think, poised to be very, very dangerous in the West. And really, they do not need the number 1 seed. That is none of their concern. So to me, if they're in the top 4, even top 5, I'm not really worried. Because to me, I think, even though we can't the topic, I can't see the Lakers finishing ahead of the Denver Nuggets or the Rockets when we're in March or April. I just don't see that happening. So overall, it's a bummer just to wrap it up real quick. It's a bummer just to see Jokic go through this, but I think he'll probably come back quicker than expected. Regarding the Thunder,
real quick, the most recent game from the Nuggets, they beat the 76ers.
They did.
With their bench and some G League players chipping in. So no starters, no regular starters anyway, played in that game. So pretty impressive showing, pretty impressive rebound there, after the Jokic injury and everything. So there's some hope there, because this is the stretch you worry about the most as a Nuggets fan, of course. Like, how much are they going to drop in the standings over this next month is the real question. Because I think everyone agrees if Jokic gets back in 4 to 5 weeks, they probably won't fall too far. They can probably still pencil in that home court advantage for the first round anyway, but how much further could they potentially fall than that is of real concern.
Yeah, if we're keeping it real, there's 6 real teams in this conference. And I would say I'm being awfully generous to the Timberwolves because I am borderline wanting to write them off this list pretty badly. But just for the sake of argument, there's the Wolves, the Rockets, Nuggets, Lakers, Spurs, and Thunder. I would say, 2 of those teams could easily drop off with the Lakers and Timberwolves. I mean, the top teams going to be fighting out in the end are going to be the Rockets, Nuggets, Spurs, and Thunder. I mean, that's what it comes down to when we get into the playoffs. So, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I was also with the Spurs when Biyama's been out too. He's been battling a lot of injuries. I think he could be a massive, a dark horse MVP contender if he was not, going through his injury troubles. So.
Yeah, let me ask you, let's zoom in on the Thunder for a second, because we've talked on this show before, smaller market team, a team perhaps of destiny. That seems off the table now in going 6 for 6 in their last 12. Maybe in some ways you could kind of give a Zag take and say, well, this is good for OKC because now they're not going to have to worry all season like the Warriors of 2016, for example. They're not going to be this team of destiny, this greatest of all time team. They'll fly under the radar a little bit more, because that was sort of the only headline really that people were talking about with OKC. I mean, it's that, and it's is Shea going to repeat as MVP? Those are kind of the 2 main narratives around that team, I think. How do you feel about OKC? Any change in perception over this most recent stretch? A little bit, more of a struggle for them going 500 in these last 12 games.
Yeah, I'm not super worried about it. I think what's just weird to me is everybody treated OKC like they're this dominant juggernaut team that won the title. I mean, if it wasn't for Tyrese Halliburton getting hurt, if he stays healthy, what happens in Game 7? So to me, they had a hot start to this season. So, they were pretty competitive. They had some really tough series going through their journey of winning the championship. This was not a team that annihilated everybody and then won the title. They had their trials and tribulations going through the playoffs last year. So to me, them going through the stretch is not super surprising. It's weird because I think people, they want to put this dominant label on the Thunder. Like they're the new, this new super team that's going to destroy the league. And I think if you look at the data, that doesn't support that at all. So in my mind, I just don't, them going 6 and 6 is not like a disappointment. I think that's kind of right where this team should be trying to defend the championship. So I'm not super worried. I think what it comes down to is what I'm looking at is to push towards the playoffs after the All-Star break. So what is their record in April and how do they look, heading into the playoffs if players don't get hurt and everybody stays healthy?
Yeah, I think the things that I've seen, especially with the loss to the Suns, as well as, multiple losses to the Spurs, I think you're seeing that teams aren't scared of the Thunder. And that makes sense because they are still a younger team in the league. But I do wonder how that plays into, like, let's say the Spurs and the Thunder match up in the playoffs. I hope it happens because that's now kind of a semi-rivalry or a rivalry that's heating up with what's happened. We talked about it before the Christmas Day games happened and the Spurs laid it to the Thunder yet again. And just kind of a vivid image that replays in my mind in thinking about their matchups is Wemby shoving Chet Holmgren to the ground and then just dunking in a wide open lane, with his incredible reach and length, of course, but just the impact of shoving him down like that. There was a play as well where Grayson Allen, I believe it was called a flagrant foul, but he just ran over Chet Holmgren and ran through him, basically knocked him to the ground. Things like that make statements, and I wonder if the league is getting this perception now that maybe, unlike last year, where I think one of the reasons they were talked about as such a dominant team was their point differential and how strong of a defensive team they were. They still are, of course. They're still the deepest team in the league. They're still the title favorites. It just seems more probable to me now that with Denver making their upgrades, even with the added experience Houston has gotten with KD, and now the Spurs seeming to have their number, certainly this season they do. We have some interesting, I think, rivals to this team, which honestly, for you and I, as people who cover the NBA, this makes it much more interesting in the West to me. So I think I can't really push the Thunder away from being the favorites now, but there's some vulnerabilities here, and I'll stop yammering now.
No, I would just add, and then if you want to move on, we can. I just think when you go to 7 games with the Nuggets and you go to 7 games with the Pacers, there's no disrespect. I think they earned it, but I guess, putting that label of this, super team that's going to take over the league and no one can touch them, I just never thought that. I just thought they were a great collective that, they had a lot of great positive energy, but also had to battle a lot of some adversity to get what they had. But I wasn't impressed by their dominance. And keep in mind, against the Nuggets, that was a team in turmoil. I mean, they lost their coach, and they still went to 7 games. So to me, that's not telling me, hey, this is a dominant force that's going to be taking over the West.
Yeah, I think we were more impressed during the regular season with their dominance, and then you're right, they took a lot of hits in the postseason that was clearly this team is young and they still need to find their way to be winners, and they did that. But you're right, it was much more of a just barely eking out that championship than, oh my goodness, this is one of the most dominant champions we've ever seen. Absolutely agree. And so I still don't really have too much of an opinion change as far as this battle of the West versus the East. The West still has that winning record that I mentioned, head to head against the East. But it is interesting at this point of the season, looking at the standings. You have in both conferences, basically teams 1 through 8 are your winning records or right at 500 teams. And then below that, in both conferences, you have losing record teams. So be curious. We're kind of getting this picture. If it stopped right now, our only winning record teams in the NBA would be the traditional 1 through 8. And 2 of those play-in tournament teams would have losing records. So just something I always find interesting to keep an eye on as we go through the season. So sounds like I think the big takeaway in this recent news is, any of these teams could still make it to the championship, to the NBA finals, but there may be a little bit more uncertainty and a little more parity in terms of who may come out of the West. And that's one thing that we've said is, things with the new CBA and with the NBA right now, it's really designed against dynasty building. OKC has navigated it brilliantly with their asset collection, but it's still volatile and it's still pushing towards parity in the league in many ways.
Agreed. I think the cool thing is that it's led by a young core of players, right? Fresh stars that have not been in the spotlight in the last few years. So I think that's pretty cool, especially in the West. I think it's refreshing. The question is, will they catch on to a casual audience? And I think that's going to be interesting. I think last year we saw that with the rivalry with Jalen Brunson and Tyrese Halliburton. And hopefully we can see that in the West, like you mentioned, with OKC, And with San Antonio, it got a little chippy there, as you mentioned. I hope that continues. I mean, that helps in terms of driving casual interest.
Yeah. Yeah, Wemby versus Chet is a real thing. I mean, it's not really a rivalry between which is the better player at this point, at least at this point in their careers, but it's going to be fun to see them continue to match up, and that Chet Holmgren's not gonna take this laying down or anything. He's going to come back and want to show want to one up Wemby, and as well as those entire teams with each other. They're going to want to make a statement and make it there. And San Antonio very quickly, the 2 seed right now in the West, if things were to end today, which odd to think that could very well end up being our Western Conference Finals. So Justin, wanted to discuss before we sign out for today, just the voting results through, I believe, 2 rounds of voting for the All-Star game. Don't know if you can update us on that, and we can look at some general impressions from voter turnout right now for the NBA All-Star games.
Yeah, so these are the fan returns. This happened today, January 6th, at the recording of this podcast. This is the second fan returns of the NBA All-Star voting. With the Western Conference, you have, I won't read the numbers, but I was going to read you the top 5 here. Luka's number 1. Nikola Jokic is number 2. I think that's awesome, just because we've talked about the marketing and pushing him as one of the better stars of the league. I think that's great that fans are recognizing that. Steph Curry's number 3. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's number 4, and Victor Wembanyama's 5. LeBron is 8th. I think that's really interesting. And then we go to the East. We have Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's fascinating. I think that speaks to his popularity, even though, his future is in flux. Jalen Brunson's number 2, Tyrese Maxey's number 3, Kay Cunningham's number 4, Donovan Mitchell's number 5. What I find really, really interesting is, you take a look at kind of the other players on this list, not the most sexiest names on here, until, you're just looking at the Eastern Conference. So I think it's going to be fascinating, especially with this new format, which we'll get to in a second. I personally despise, but I think there's a campaign to get LeBron into the All-Star game, which I find is a little ridiculous. I don't know how you feel about that, considering he's 8th on the fan voting here.
Yeah, I am surprised to see LeBron in that 8th spot.
Yeah, me too.
That's something like when you consider, people compare this stretch in LeBron's career for obvious reasons with Jordan's stretch with the Wizards. And that, if you look at how those All-Star games turned out, very, very different from what's happening for LeBron right now, which I wouldn't argue with his placement in there. Personally, I wouldn't vote for him to be an all-star at this point in his career, and given how deep and talented the West is. But with Jordan, they were doing what, like Mariah Carey sang to him in a Wizards dress, and he was certainly very involved in some awesome all-star games there. An epic showdown with Kobe in one of those. So it's just interesting to see. And it, I don't want to get into this too much, and I don't want to like dunk on LeBron or anything, but him being 8th on that list does show some fan fatigue. And I think people are realizing that, he's not, for one thing, he sat out towards the beginning of the season, and there was a lot of debate on how legitimate that was, or if he was kind of pouting over not getting that extension. That's kind of hearsay. And then the other thing is, since his return, the Lakers' record has been worse than before. They actually got off to a pretty hot start in the season before he returned. So fair or not, I think people are kind of pinning some of that on LeBron, and I think LeBron fatigue is a real thing at this point. And he's been in the league a long time. He's been in the marketing materials like you and I talked about over the offseason. I mean, he was like on the advertisement for League Pass, which fair enough, he's still getting the most clicks of anyone in the NBA, but I think there's also a big portion of basketball fans that are just tired of having him at the forefront of conversations compared to, what you just mentioned with all this young talent coming up and what we've talked about a lot on the show. So I won't belabor that point. But I think also you look down that list, Kawhi Leonard is lower on that list. James Harden, these are big names from the past, but these are guys who have been in the league for a long time now at this point. And of course, Kawhi, he's part-time. You don't know if he's playing or not. So that plays into it. A lot of controversy, a lot of negativity around the Clippers, and they're not having the best season. So all of that accumulates too. But those were names that even just a couple of years ago, you would think would automatically be well within the top 10, certainly. And LeBron, certainly like top 3, no doubt, like lock that in.
Yeah. I think, and it's this LeBron conversation, I know we're tight for time, but I do want to mention, I think it goes further than just fatigue of LeBron. I think if you take a look at Jordan's Q rating in terms of his popularity, way more beloved.
Yeah.
I think the fans and the media, they resent LeBron, unfairly or not. There's a lot of hard feeling towards him, and I think that goes to Los Angeles, but it even goes further than that. And then I have to say, just the Lakers, they're in third place right now. I mean,
yeah,
they are in. I mean, you have Luka, who is a generational talent, and for LeBron, who keeps his body in pristine shape. And we've talked about this in the text chat. I don't think it is a age thing in terms of his defensive effort. I don't think it's just like he's morphed into this old man. He just stands and doesn't care. I just think he's checked out. I just think, to me, this is the third seed. I mean, why are those conversations around him, about his motivation, and they're the third seed? I mean, on all retrospect, I mean, they have a chance to win the title here. I mean, if things break their way, if injuries happen, I mean, that's not inconceivable. So I just think and usually I'm not the one to really suggest retirement for players, but I just don't know what LeBron is doing. I don't understand why he's in the league. What's going on here? Because I just don't think, I think if LeBron was giving a clear effort, and I think what we saw that in the Olympics, he was awesome at the Olympics. You saw it, he was trying there. Like you saw a different LeBron, and I just think we don't see that in the NBA at all, regular season, let alone in the playoffs. And I mean, that's unfortunate. I think the fans are picking up on that, and that's why I think you see the voting as it is. I just don't think they're just sick of LeBron. I think it's his play on the court in terms of his motivation, because we know this guy's he's a one-on-one talent. You will never see a player like LeBron again. And I think what we're seeing is very unsatisfactory. And I think we've seen JJ Redick play, mental gymnastics and trying to not just kill this guy, in the post-game press conferences. But we're keeping it real here. I mean, you're right, man. He's the reason why the Lakers have struggled lately. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. I mean, you look at his plus minus as well.
There you go.
There's data that backs that up. There's highlights you can openly see. You can also see like LeBron's reaction when his teammates do something well. I mean, LeBron really needed to defer to Luka. Like Luka is such a gift to him in LA. And instead of, at least from what it looks like and what body language and perception looks like, I don't think LeBron feels like Luka is that gift and is someone that he should defer to, which granted, LeBron, say what you want about him. I mean, he is an amazing competitor in the NBA's history. People will knock at him for competitive drive, things like that. But objectively, you're talking about someone who, no matter where you rank him, I think most people are going to like very conservatively rank him top 20, even if you have like a huge problem with LeBron. And I just think Jordan didn't have to deal with that when he went to the Wizards. Like he was still very much like revered by that team. There was no one brought in who was like, hey, Jordan, you should really let this guy have the ball more. He didn't have the same experience in Washington. We never really saw Jordan have to like defer like that. I mean, we saw him have to improve and become a little more selfless, like that pass that he made to Steve Kerr, where Steve Kerr hit that jump shot to ice that game for the Bulls. We didn't really see Jordan have to defer like that. So I think those are very different things, and I'm not sure how well or if Jordan would have been able to handle deferring like that the way that I think LeBron should have in an ideal world for LA and their planning for this season, and trying to get a title with this core, which I still say they're not going to do, but that would be their best chance.
But I just don't see Jordan just not playing defense, just sitting there doing nothing.
Totally.
Like to me, I think with Jordan on the Wizards, it was just, I think his skills, starting to deteriorate. I think he recognized he needed to bow out. And I think that's just father time. And, I think now we've seen this the evolution of just taking care of your body. We've seen players, play longer into their 40s. And be great in their 30s. But I just think for LeBron, I don't think it's I think, yeah, of course, he passed his prime. Yes, his best days up behind him. Yes. But do I see him just like he's this old man out there? No. I mean, we see guys highlights of this dude just dunking all over the place. Like, there's a motivation factor here. I just think, to me, he should retire now. I mean, you point, and to me, I wasn't really a huge believer, like his body language and this kind of all this other stuff about him. This is the first year where I'm like, God, man, just like, what are we doing? Like, and now I get it. If the Lakers stunk, I'd be kind of defending him and be like, well, they suck. Like, like, what are you going to do? Like, he's not going to risk his body. Is it the honorable thing to do? No, but like, they're terrible. I mean, who cares? Just let the guy do what he's going to do. Let him play with his son, and we'll see what happens. But they're competitive. You have a generational player with Luka. You should be mentoring this guy. And LeBron's game, he has such a massive IQ, and he defers anyway, that he can be a supplement, take care of his body, to which he doesn't have to be the main guy. And we're seeing, we're seeing just him not being motivated. And I have to say, I think it's also a direct rebuke of JJ Redick. I don't think he respects him. I don't. Why are you not playing hard for your coach that's out here? And he's clearly frustrated. He's clearly frustrated with this team. You guys are supposed to be drinking wine and doing podcasts and stuff. You clearly don't respect this guy as a coach.
Yeah, which is interesting because a lot of people thought maybe things have changed, but a lot of people thought Redick was basically a LeBron plant coach, that they were such good buddies on their podcast that, this has to work out. Maybe that is the case. Maybe not. I don't know. I do want to give credit to Redick that I think he has been willing to zag harder against, I don't think he's just laid down and accepted like this is LeBron's team or like things like that. I think he's been trying the best that he can with what he has. I just think we've said for a long time that it's going to be near impossible to win a title when you have LeBron at a max salary at this point in his career. Not even intended as a diss on LeBron. It's just you're paying a 40-plus-year-old human being max money and trying to win a title in the NBA. That is very, very difficult to accomplish. And I think Redick has done a lot of good things. I think his messaging has been pretty good. People kind of laughed because he said that they were going to have a really hard practice recently on like a Saturday after a performance that they put up. Maybe that was the Christmas game, but NBA head coaches are personality managers for one thing. I think he's tried to do pretty good by that team with what they have again in terms of the X's and O's. But even still, I don't think he has a whole lot of power. I think this team overall in LA, just to kind of put a bow on this, I think they're just riding out this season. I do think probably first or second round exit, and then they will be able to move forward with more flexibility and able to change up this roster to a more team centered around Luka, which is really what it should be.
What a waste. What a waste with Austin Reeves. What a waste.
What
are we doing?
Biding their time.
Like,
look at this. We said we were not going to talk about the Lakers. Here we are. But it is interesting. I mean, these are two all-time players in LeBron and Luka. You could almost argue, I would say AD was the best pairing that we ever saw with LeBron. You know, that 2020 season, how they played off each other. And this pairing with Luka is not an ideal fit on the court like we thought it might not be because they're so ball dominant, but still in terms of offensive talent, Luka's, I think you could say pretty handily the most offensively powerful player that LeBron has ever played with, especially like in this stage of his career. I mean, the other one would probably be Kyrie when he elevated his game to get that game-winning shot in that final series for Cleveland. I mean, that was outstanding. But, Luka, I think, has all those all-NBA superlatives and things that he's brought to the table, and already a finals trip in his own right with a weaker supporting cast. So you're right. I mean, I think we'll look back at, and I think LeBron will too someday, to be honest, and wonder kind of what could have been, what could have gone differently with, again, like I said earlier, him being gifted Luka Doncic. Yeah, that's a huge gift. Like, you could argue nobody's been gifted more from a trade than that.
These are the things that when you're not talking about if LeBron's a Hall of Famer or if he's not one of the top 75 players ever in the history of the game, duh. But when you're trying to split hairs in the GOAT conversation, this is what kills you. This is what takes you out. This is why you have the old heads, old timers being like, why am I going to take LeBron seriously? What? Like, you have Luka Doncic and this is what we're seeing on the court? Like, you're the third seed. Are you kidding me? Like, you have your coach, everything's made for you. You have Austin Reeves' ascension, and this is what you're doing? And the way JJ Redick's talking, it's like they're the last team in the Western Conference. They're the worst team in the league. They're the third seed. And this is what this is why they're always going to bring out Michael Jordan. They're going to hold that against him. It's like, you put yourself in that regard, with all, I hate to be like a Skip Bayless kind of using his stuff, but no, you get the number, you put the chosen one. And I'm a huge fan of LeBron, but I'd say I've been very disappointed. This is probably the most disappointed I have been in LeBron probably in the history of his career. I've been very disappointed.
Yeah, well, and Justin, I mean, longtime listeners of the show, you all know as well. I mean, I was a huge LeBron guy. I was a huge LeBron guy.
Yeah, way more than
and no, same sort of thing. Just decisions he's made on and off the court. I don't know. I have a tough time even getting him into that GOAT argument, and I know that's like a hot take right now in 2025, but I also do kind of have this theory that we're getting a lot of recency bias right now. People, I think in any generation, people want to feel like they have the best ever that they're viewing right now. So those types of emotions play into this. I do wonder, like Justin, when you and I are talking in 2035, whether it's here or just on the phone, I wonder what that retrospect of LeBron's career is going to look like. And again, no doubt he's one of the greats. He's way up there. I think even people that are huge LeBron detractors, I mean, you're going to get laughed at if you rank LeBron like 20th or something like that, So no doubt he's one of the greats. And I'm not totally trying to slam him here, but you're right, man. It's been the Lakers' tenure, I think, has been a overall pretty big disappointment, especially when you consider roster decisions that were made after their title, but then how quickly, to Rob Pelinka's credit, they were able to like kind of rebound and rebuild in LA, and then you pull off arguably the greatest trade of all time. And this season, it feels like they're just kind of waiting around, twiddling their thumbs for next year. And in spite of all that, you're right, Justin. They're the third seed in the West, which is crazy.
With one team that is unproven and another team that has shown some vulnerabilities lately and has struggled through the playoffs last year. It's not impossible. Like, I don't, it's just perplexing. And to answer your question, I think, well, you know, you're talking about when we get older, what was LeBron's legacy going to be? I just think, at least with the NBA, I think there is a tendency, I'm going to sound like an old man here. I think a lot of, younger fans are going to be used to players not having that competitive instinct. I think we've seen it with Kawhi. I think we've seen it with like James Harden. We just seen it with a lot of these guys, even with Kevin Durant, just like guys who are super talented, but like there's just personality issues or things that just don't work out, but they're insane athletes and by their numbers and their talent should be way more accomplished than what they are. And I think this fans are just going to be kind of like just used to it. Where I think, to me, there is a lot of disappointment. It was, to me, put it this way. If there was disappointment in Shaquille O'Neal's career, remember people were saying, and with Shaq, he should have won more titles. He didn't get in shape. Like, he was unmotivated. Shaq won 4 championships. He won 4 titles. He was the most dominant force in the league with Kobe Bryant. Like, what do we say about the players now if we think Shaq's career is a disappointment? I mean, I don't know. It's disheartening because I think in terms of talent, I think that the players are certainly way more advanced, but in terms of that competitive instinct, I think there's some huge problems. I do see some players bringing it back. Jalen Brunson, I think, has that. Tyrese Halliburton, I think Victor Wembanyama. I think so far what I've seen with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, there are some players I think has Jokic, Jokic perfect, in terms of his competitive instinct. But I think the players that have, and I put Kobe in that disappointment realm too. I think there was issues with, I think it kind of started with him a little bit. We've seen him just in terms of certain issues in the playoffs, like, things that, I thought he underperformed in terms of what his abilities were, despite how many titles he won. And I just feel it kind of spurred from there in terms of just attitude, as opposed to, hey, your play just wasn't good enough and let the cards fall where they may. So I don't know. I got a huge rant, but I don't know. Maybe if there's a spur change, and maybe we'll see some of the younger players changing. Jokic, if he wins more titles, maybe that will start to change the tide there. But yeah, I think with LeBron, I've been very disappointed, to say the least.
And, alongside, and Justin, I know we got to wrap up at some point. I don't want to keep you here all night, but, I think the other interesting factor, since we're having this big discussion about LeBron, is on his same timeline, just a little bit after LeBron gets started, Steph Curry is drafted, and he has, I think, probably the highest Q score of the 2010s, and he also has that winning finals record against LeBron James, which is a really interesting, I guess, sort of, dynamic there. Like, you have at the same time where I would say LeBron is the best player of the 2010s, you have Steph Curry, like, kind of in some ways showing him up, and at a certain point, like after the decision goes down and all that, and once Steph Curry rises to MVP level, I mean, he's more beloved and arguably more influential over the league in terms of like how it has shifted to such a perimeter focused game now at this point. And there's obvious reasons for that. I mean, Steph Curry's skill is you can coach up players to be more accurate 3-point shooters easier than you can coach up players to run the lane like LeBron does, who's just this athletic freak of nature freight train. Like, you're not going to have many guys who can just naturally do that in the NBA. Like, Giannis comes to mind of someone who's been able to come in and gradually, after lifting weights, be able to do that and run the floor the way he does. But that's pretty rare, in terms of, not saying that players can shoot like Steph Curry can, But what I'm saying is the league overall evolved to like these higher 3-point percentages as rosters and just that ability to have the perimeter shot that certainly Steph Curry had a big influence on.
Yeah, and excellent point you bring up Steph Curry. You look at the Warriors. I mean, they're the 8th seed, right? A lot of turmoil. How many games have Draymond Green been ejected? I mean, Steve Kerr just got ejected with Snoop Dogg calling it. And guess what Steph Curry's doing here? He's having, a phenomenal season. His points are up this year. Really, with his 3-point percentage is solid. The Warriors are not going to win the title. And look at Steph Curry, what he's doing. I mean, compared to LeBron in terms of physically gifts, in terms of him, I mean, I think he's more physically just talented than Steph Curry. Steph Curry's playing at a way more higher level. And the Warriors have no shot at winning the title.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, Justin, because it shows what's different in 2025. Like LeBron and Steph, these were like main story guys in the 2010s. And thank goodness for Steph Curry, to his credit, he squeezed out a title in 2022 that was pretty amazing that they pulled that off. A lot of people would say that Celtics team really should have gotten the job done, or even that the Warriors shouldn't have even made the finals that year. But hey, they got it done. They won the games. Whereas like when Jordan was on the Wizards, to go back to that, I mean, you knew just based on that roster, based on what Jordan was doing, like this is not a title team. This is like Jordan showing what he can still do for these 2 seasons or however long he decides to play. This is not a title threat. Like that was pretty clear. LeBron and Steph still at times get that attention like they're the main story when really LeBron's teammate Luka, Victor Wembanyama is quickly rising, OKC and SGA, Jokic, like you mentioned. These guys are really more that main story now of the NBA. But we have all this history with LeBron and Steph, and we're interested in their legacies and their narratives. So they're still floating around here.
Well, the sexier media story. I mean, look at the NFL. I mean, what leads to Cowboys? I mean, separating my hatred for the Cowboys, just looking at it from a media perspective, I mean, I'm not the only one who thinks this. Even Cowboys fans agree with me. But if the Cowboys are any type of relevant, they're going to lead, Sports Center or First Take over, a team. If the Bears go, undefeated, the Cowboys, if they're, slightly behind them, the Cowboys are probably going to get more headlines than a team that might be going undefeated. They're just based on popularity. I think that goes for LeBron too.
Maybe undefeated would lead, but anything short of that. Yeah. But no, point well taken. I mean, they're going to get catapulted to the headlines. Yep. Yeah, and we're seeing that with players that were used to being on the main stage and that I think get a lot of clicks still because they were, but really the deeper substance now. I mean, not to take away anything from what Steph is doing, because he's, I think, doing everything he can, and as an older guard in the league, he's really kind of an anomaly with how he's playing this season. But really, I think that's something that now that sports has evolved, I think the NBA media is going to have to evolve a little bit too. Like you have these longevities extended, yes, but we should also develop our media around making these really the top talent of the league more interesting. But maybe it's just organically going to sort itself out as these players go into retirement. You'll then get that zoom in. The question that we'll never know the answer to is, could the league have ascended to a higher level of popularity or interest had these stories been cultivated earlier? That's really just conceptual. We don't really know the answer to that.
Well, I will say, we bash social media, we kind of crap on it, and rightfully so, with a lot of the negatives. But I will say, in terms of sports, as a positive, the rise of, journalists, and it's unfortunate because a lot of their work, they're not getting paid for it. It's a passion project. But the rise of the All City Network, living here in Denver with DNVR, and then we've had plenty of guests, from Locked On podcast covering a variety of teams. Like, I think you're seeing a lot more of your hardcore fan move. ESPN's a supplement, but I think in terms of getting more in-depth coverage, you're following content creators that are following these teams intimately. And our show is evidence of that, not necessarily by us, but by our guests who are providing in-depth analysis and providing great perspective on the rest of the league as opposed to just these superficial narratives. So I think just based on the popularity of these independent media sources, I do think hopefully that will lead to better coverage. And I think it is. And I think that will eventually lead to, fixing a lot of these, your typical and boring narratives that you see on a regular basis.
Well said. I couldn't agree with you more. I won't even add to that. Justin, do you want to talk about All-Star format, or should we save that for the next In the Lab?
Say it for next time. I don't got the patience for that.
We'll talk about the interesting, let's say, All-Star game format in the near future. We'll pull Alan into that discussion. Shout out to Alan, by the way, hoping that he feels better. He's out for this episode, obviously. But once again, shout out. If you made it all this way, would love to know your thoughts about our LeBron discussion here. That honestly, if this was unplanned, this just came up organically, but I'm glad we talked that out because I'd be curious to know your all's thoughts in terms of these last years in LA for LeBron, and what your thoughts are in terms of how he's performing, getting that 8th place in votes on the All-Star list. Are you surprised by that? Like I was pretty surprised by that. But thank you as always for your support. We're going to go ahead and sign off since we're approaching the 90-minute mark here. But really enjoyed the conversation, Justin, as always. And so for Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. Thanks again for tuning in to In the Lab with Hoopsology, and we will see you guys again in the very near future. Peace out.
See you next time.
And that should do it for us today. On behalf of Matt, Justin, and Alan, this is Tim Kittrow saying we'll see you next time. Kaboom!